Hello, and welcome to Berkeley Social Welfare. My name is Christine Scudder, she, her, and I'm the Executive Director of Academic Programs here. I'm coming into your screen today to talk with you about practicum education or internship orientation. And there are some important next steps you need to take, even though the classroom experience won't start for a few months from now. So let's get started. Again, whether you've been able to come to our physical campus in person yet or not, we're so excited to welcome you to the beauty that is Berkeley campus, and specifically to our program that we are inhabited in Haviland Hall. And this is an image at the top of the stairs right when you come through those doors, and you will get to explore this building and have many classes here. And so I just really want to make sure that you all know that even though as of this recording, it's April, your educational journey starts now. It really gets started as we think about what it means to be a social worker, right? You're coming into this MSW program, right, to go to the next level in your professional learning and development. And as you know, social work is a varied and expansive profession at micro, meso, and macro levels of practice in a whole variety of settings, from street outreach to hospitals, from law offices to medical offices to behavioral health and many other places. We may also be in spaces of policy development. We may be at the Capitol. We may be engaged in program evaluation, or other types of nonprofit management structures. There's all kinds of ways that we can be social workers. And when we think about practicum education, social workers and social work learning experiences are found in these and many other spaces. So I want to just really go over a couple things about our full-time MSW program, to really make sure it's clear how our schedule will generally work. So our classes, we have, required coursework of different types on Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. So this is very much a full-time, as they say, brick and mortar in-person program. As you can see here, classes can be scheduled anytime between 8 a.m. and generally 6 p.m. There may be breaks in between that, but just to know that that's the kind of earliest start and typically our latest ending time. There may be some variance there. On Tuesdays is the same, 8 to 6. And also in one's first year in the MSW program, also you will have classes on Fridays. Okay. And so all of the classroom enrollment isn't until July. Okay. So July 14th, and you'll receive other information and emails from my colleagues in our student services department about how to do that. The graduate student advising officer, Jessica Sharp, and her colleagues will be sharing more with you throughout the summer. But in terms of the focus for this particular video and orientation, we want to make sure to both understand the internship in context, but also to address the internship schedule. So MSW students in their first year are typically in their internship for an 8-hour shift, generally sometime between 8 and 5 on both Wednesdays and Thursdays. Now, as you'll see here at the bottom, your agency or site-based internship work starts on September 20th. Once the academic year starts in August, between then and that September 20th date, we have coursework for you at Berkeley to help ready you for the internship experience. So it's not as if you will have nothing on Wednesdays or Thursdays, but it may not be a full 8-hour chunk, okay? But we just like to really prepare all students and have found that the visual is really helpful to really see that this is in fact a very full-time program, 5 days a week, and to really help you to prepare for that. So one of the things that I think students have found helpful, that we've talked about with internships, is that the MSW internship, and to really understand it as a collaboration, right, between the requirements and the expectations of 3 key partners, that of course, us at Berkeley Social Welfare and the Council on Social Work Education, which is our accrediting body. So the Council on Social Work Education really defines the terms under which we must deliver the social work curriculum, and they also establish guidelines for field education or internship. So that's Berkeley and Council on Social Work Education, or you'll hear us refer to them sometimes as CSWE. The other part of our collaborative triad, of course, is the agency setting, right? So we need to hold the requirements and expectations of settings that vary widely, as we talked about social work does. And then, of course, that third part, and you're most important right now watching us, that the student learner, right? And so any internship is an effective balance between the needs and expectations of the university, the agency, and the student, right? And so to find how all of those things fit together, requires some assessment, some thinking, and some forethought, which we'll talk a little bit about here. So I want to just talk with you about competency-based practicum education. And, these are terms and notions that you'll see used throughout your time in the MSW program in a variety of formats, including building what we call your learning agreement, which is a contract that you develop together with the agency where you will be an intern that really articulates what are the goals and objectives of your time there. So each of those spaces from the learning agreement, and then you'll also be evaluated at the midterm and the end of your internship experience. Both years that you are in internship will really look at each of these competency areas. So we look at areas of engagement that includes with individuals, families, organizations, and or communities, consultation, coordination, and collaboration, looking at assessment of individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities, intervention planning and implementation, systemic intervention, and those in the blue are kind of some of those areas where you may have specific learning goals. When we look at the ones in gold here, professional communication, professional ethics, professional conduct, professional growth and development, these also are areas where you may have particular goals and objectives in the internship, and they may be measured slightly differently. But all of them are important and we hold them together, all nine, as we think about what it means to be engaged in competency-based practicum education. So when we think about practicum education requirements at Berkeley per se, we want to make sure that we talk with you about how field education or practicum education kind of follows together in a progression. So the first year, the generalist or the foundation here, right on the bottom, kind of in gold, really kind of, again, as the name suggests, it really holds that foundation, right, of learning that you build upon from here. And you have foundation internship or practicum education, and you'll also have foundation coursework, right, in classroom spaces. And so, what that means in field education specifically is the successful completion of an 8-unit placement. So, all of our internships are full academic years. So, you are in the same internship fall and spring. So, together that's 8 units. It's 4 in the fall and 4 in the spring. As I mentioned previously, our typical internship schedule begins for foundation students on Wednesday, September 20th. And typically, our foundation students are in field education on Wednesdays and Thursdays. The generalist or foundation year also requires the successful completion of 3 units of integrated seminar, plus 400 hours and competent progression to the next level. So from one semester to the next, as well as from 1 year to the next. So we really look at field education as, as a continuum, right, across the academic year. And it's very important to understand that we assess before students are placed in internships, and we continuously assess a student's readiness and capacity to engage in field education throughout their experience in the program. Second year or specialization placements, that doesn't pertain so much to you just now as an audience, but it will soon enough. It'll come fast. So that second year is more of a specialization internship. And this requires students have a successful completion of 12-unit placement. This second year practicum experience begins right after Labor Day on Wednesday, September 6th. And our second year students or specialization students in field education are in internship Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Okay, so whereas in the first year, students have classes 3 days a week and internship 2, it's the reverse in their second year. Okay, so that's a definite increase, even though it might only sound like one more day. Students definitely experience, a pretty big change between the first and the second year. 3 days a week in internship becomes more of the time that you're spending there than in the classroom space, right? And it can definitely start to feel like you're there more of the time. And the skills that are required, the tasks that are involved can also become more as the name suggests, more specialized and require more of students. So I want to just acknowledge too that sometimes students come into our program and really want to do particular activities or have particular kinds of internships that are really best suited from the agency perspective at the specialization year, right? In part because students are there again, that third day a week, so 24 hours a week versus 16, can mean that there's different things that you have time and opportunity to kind of dig into. There's more time between, they're thinking about the training that you'll need to get up to speed to do some of the things that may be new for you, some time for you to practice and learn. And as you take on more, more and more over the course of the academic year, again, some placement settings and projects and agencies are better suited for that foundation experience, and others are better suited for a specialization experience. So sometimes you might hear us say that. We might talk about those differences as you share with us some of your preferences and interests, for example. I know not all students come into MSW programs interested in learning about therapy, for example. I do want to let you know that more kind of psychotherapy, clinical work in an individual or family or group psychotherapy model, those internships are generally for second years only. That's for several different reasons, but I just like to put that out there because it is a very common question and request. And our agencies really, for a variety of reasons, some of which I've already discussed, but the others have to do with the coursework that's typically needed before you do some of those activities, regardless of what you might have as an undergraduate degree. Those are things that agencies really look for. So that's just one of several examples of places that really require a specialization level of both experience and exposure, but as well as coursework. So, as I started to mention, again, we're looking at the triad, right? We need all three of us working together to facilitate a successful internship. And I just want to name a couple of things that may seem obvious to you, but just want to make sure we're on the same page as we get started. Agency requirements are going to vary, right? And agencies for social work interns are both places to learn and they are also places of service, right? And so it is not simply about the student's educational needs, but it's also, again, about the needs in those spaces of service. So focusing on the learning side for a moment, I want to think about, agencies, designate tasks that are appropriate for foundation level students. So we place students working together with agencies at foundation placements that are right sized, right, for kind of the level that you are at coming into our program. As places to learn, our agencies must provide you with weekly one-on-one supervision. Some also may have a separate person. Sometimes it's the same person who we might refer to as a task supervisor. That's the person who may kind of assign or oversee the day-to-day tasks or issues that you may be working with. And I mentioned earlier that learning contractor agreement, right? That's set up early on in the process and really sets the foundation for what you're doing in the internship. And again, there's those evaluations both at the midpoint and at the year end. So one of the things to think about, as a place to learn in agencies, you're both learning kind of how to do it, whatever it might be. For example, maybe you're learning about how to conduct a program evaluation, or maybe you're learning how to run a psychoeducation group, which is different than a therapy group, which is more appropriate for a second year student, but a psychoeducational group. Or you might be learning about how to facilitate client access to certain legal services, for example, right? So that's the kind of how to do it, right? The nuts and bolts. And then, each agency, has their or organization or site has their own flavor of how they do it. This is how we do it at this school, or this is how we do it in our, agency or this county or whatever. And so that's one of the things that's really interesting about internships is sometimes you may have peers and colleagues who are in very similar places, but they may do the thing very differently, right? And so you'll learn from each other about, again, that range and scope of social work practice that we see. Again, as I mentioned, internships are, of course, also places of service, whether that agency is primarily serving individual, family or group clients. They may be serving communities. They may be, their service sector may be focused on the organization in a more maybe macro focus. But it's important to understand, though, that, agencies have to develop, a sense of you as a learner, what you already know. Again, you're not applying for or coming into a job here. This is an internship. And so its primary orientation is one of learning. But again, when you're doing so within the context of a space of service, it's really important, that you bring your professional self, that you bring your learning, that you bring your questions, that you bring, what you do know and where you're not sure, and to kind of bring that out in the internship space, so that they're able to work together with you to respect both your skills and their needs. So sometimes that might mean that you might be gung-ho and ready for a particular kind of work, or work with a particular client, or you have a particular idea of how you envisioned what you'd be doing in your internship. And sometimes that on-ramp, right, if you will, might take a moment, right? Because the agency needs to kind of get to know you and understand, where you are, how you're making sense of what's happening in the classroom and what they do in their particular site, and connecting those dots, right, with what their constituents, their clients need, right, and finding that sweet spot, and then they work together with you, and through your learning agreement and other ways, to really help understand and scaffold your learning across the academic year. Okay. And agencies also will vary really differently in terms of, what's appropriate and expected in those spaces in terms of dress, right? In terms of, like, if you're doing, street outreach, it might be really different than if you're working in, a legal setting, for example, right? Also, different agencies and spaces have different notions of time, right? And timeliness. There may be, of course, a really wide variance in location of where internships are, where they physically are located. There's important things about hours, breaks, and start and end dates. And I'll mention this a few different times. We have our standard practicum calendar. As I mentioned, foundation students start an internship on September 20th. But there are some agencies that, because of their requirements, remember, as I said, the internship requires a collaboration, right, between all three: the student needs, those of the university, and those of the agency. So long as an agency is able to meet our standards, they may have more than what we require, right? And that's something that, when we know about that and we refer students, we may say that, right, this requires an earlier start date. For example, this isn't the only place where this happens, but for example, K-12 school settings, right? Those are settings that begin earlier, before September 20th, right? Typically in August. And schools are starting earlier and earlier anymore, but that's, I guess we're doing that too in this video. But so an intern, in order to respect the continuity of care for the students in that K-12 setting, and in order to respect the environment of that school, many school districts will say, hey, we'd love to have an MSW intern, but if you come with us, we need you to come, you need to be here at the beginning of the school year. Why? Because you need to be part of orientation, and you need to, kind of be part of the way that the school sets itself up for the year. And they may go longer, right, than our spring semester end date. And so those are just important things to know. If you are not able to be at all flexible with those dates that we've posted, it's important to let us know that. That will, shift, the type of agencies that we will send you to for a match. So it's important to think about those things as you consider, different agency kind of contexts and things that interest you. So location, location, location. I just want to say, as a social worker for 20 plus years, I've worked in all these places on this map and beyond. Social work can involve a lot of travel and some back and forth. We're here in Berkeley, and you may, I don't know, some of you might not be sure yet exactly where you're going to be living, when you begin your classes here. But one of the things that we really need you to think about, again, starting now, is to help us understand if there's anything related to location that we should keep in mind. Again, as you'll hear us say throughout the process, we'll do our very best to try to, again, really find that sweet spot match between what you're looking for and what kind of your considerations are, and what the expectations are of the agency. But it is just important for those of you who might be relocating to the San Francisco Bay Area, please do some of your homework around commute and things like that, so you have, a good sense of, of some of your questions or particular preferences related to location. So I also want to acknowledge that student learning needs really vary, right? Each of you comes to our program with a certain level of skill, both academic skill and also, we're looking for your practice experience. And, you already earned your spot here. So again, welcome and congratulations. It's a lot to be proud of to be accepted into this very competitive program. And we're delighted to work with you here. And we also know that different students come into our program with skills in different areas. Some of us may be really strong in certain ways, like perhaps we have a lot of chops working on working with individuals, or maybe we've always worked with children, or we've only ever worked with Tay, or we love working with older adults, or we really are focused on kind of more of a macro perspective before we even come into the program, right? And so we're going to be helping you think about some of those things in a way we'll talk about in a little bit, to help us better understand what skills do you bring already, right? And what exposure might you need? Because the MSW degree, as I said at the top, social work is a wide and varied profession. And so in order for us to help support, prepare you for kind of what the world expects, if you will, when someone has MSW after their name, right? That suggests a certain level of depth as well as breadth in this profession. And so you may find that you come into our program with a passion in a particular area. I only want to work with this population. We're going to also at times want to push you a bit, to explore, so that you come out of our program with both depth and breadth, because there are some things, again, that you may already have and have had some exposure to at the pre-MSW level. We really want to support you to think about your internship as how can it take you somewhere a little bit different to help, again, broaden, deepen, increase, expand, as you move towards the professional degree of an MSW. So those are some things to think about. Your learning needs, you may have particular preferences and populations, of folks that you are passionate about working with. Maybe groups of folks who you don't have a lot of experience with yet, but you're excited to work with. Those are things that can be helpful for us to understand. Your learning needs in terms of sites of practice. Again, social work is so broad. Some spaces are very formal, others are informal. Different spaces have different, foci. So, is the focus of the organization, harm reduction and substance abuse focused? Is it more focused on intimate partner violence or child abuse? Is the focus on working in schools, right? All of those are really different things. And those are just some examples. And so, to really think about like where, what kind of space, like what kind of work are you interested in? It's okay if you don't know all of this now, but we do want to ask, as you're going to have to quickly be sharing with us some of the things that you're thinking about that will help us to consider what we understand as your learning needs and preferences, and to hold those together as we look at available placements that are approved by our school, and that are, excited to welcome in a foundation student. We also always want to think about, as social workers, our positionality, right? How does who we are in terms of race, in terms of gender identity, in terms of class, in terms of language, in terms of abilities, in terms of so many elements and aspects of self, sexuality, so many parts of that. How do we think about who we are as social workers and what we may want to bring and what we feel equipped to bring into certain spaces? Where do we have edges and growing areas to learn? And how does that relate to, what we're interested in as an internship? The other thing we want to bring in too is that, our student learning needs may also involve formal accommodations. We have the Disabled Students Program, or DSP, is part of our campus, and that's also referenced later in the resource slides, as well as some other information we'll be sending to you. And many of our students, have sought out services through DSP, for formal accommodations for physical disabilities, mental health related concerns, where students may need particular accommodations to their academic schedule. And one of the things that, is important for us to make sure that students understand is that whereas sometimes, one might think of accommodations for a classroom setting in terms of, for example, some students might have accommodations related to having additional time on tests, for example, or accommodations related to a low distraction environment, something like that. Sometimes students don't think to include right, the requests for accommodations in their internship space because it happens off campus, but to understand that your internship is absolutely a course. It just happens to take place in an agency instead of at Howland Hall or on the UC Berkeley campus, unless actually we do have a few internships on the UC Berkeley campus, but meaning not in our necessarily our program, right? And so it's important to know that those are things that you can ask for as well. So we encourage those of you who may be considering accommodations to really reach out to our DSP program to do it early, and to because it is a campus-wide program. They do have very high demand, and we do encourage students to reach out early to think about that and talk with them about what you might need, and let them know you're an MSW student and you will be in an internship, and you may want to just talk together about whether you need accommodations. Now, whether an agency knows that you have accommodations is something you would need to share with them because that's confidential. We wouldn't automatically share that, nor can we with agencies. Sometimes students feel comfortable to talk with our team and our faculty who will be assigned to work with you throughout the academic year, to talk about how to bring that up in agencies. You can also talk about with that issue with a DSP counselor. You could talk about it with our graduate advisor, our MSW advisoring office in the School of Social Welfare. So there's a lot of places to talk about this. I just like to really make sure that we discuss that, as you come into the program. Some of our students are parents, may have other, whether you're parents or not, perhaps you're caring for your own parents, you're caring for young ones or others who need your time, attention, and care. You may have other important life logistics. These are things that, while you don't have to tell us your business, and we want to be respectful of that, if there are particular learning needs or considerations that you have, we ask that you do, if they're important for us to know when considering various internships. As I mentioned before, right, there is a wide variance in terms of what agencies expect and require of students. And so we do like to try to do our very best. We can't make guarantees that we'll place you in particular places or give you exactly what you ask for, but we do our best to try to find that sweet spot in terms of, kind of balancing the needs of that trifecta that I talked about. And that really kind of brings me to the last one on this slide is really, as faculty, we do really try to think about balancing student wants and learning needs, right? So some of what we'll look at are both your responses to an application, which I'll get into in a moment, as well as your resume, which we ask you to send to us again. I know it was part of your application process. We ask you to update that resume, take off those hours we asked you to include as part of your application, right? To tell us exactly how many hours you worked in each place. Please remove that. That's outside the graduate application process. Is very distracting for internships to have to read and take in. But please make sure that resume is updated and refreshed. And we want to really look at that together with the things that you're sharing with us in your application for an internship and think about them together, and to just let you know again that sometimes what we may refer you to an internship that has more of what we think you need, and it may or may not always feel like what you want. And so we do try to be really clear about what we're thinking, and I like to make sure that students understand where we're coming from, and I've tried to kind of outline some of that getting up to this part. So I also want to take a moment to acknowledge that some of our students who come into our program may have legal histories that can sometimes show up on background checks, and this can come into play when students may apply for a field practicum or internship because a background check, while not required everywhere, is required most places. We do let students know requirements. Or we try to take into account what you've shared with us may be barriers or challenges, whether it's legal histories or other areas, that we do try to factor that in when making a good match. But it is also predicated on you letting us know, as certain questions that we ask on the questionnaire. But I do want to let you know that whether it's practicum, employment, or those of you who might want to pursue licensure, the National Association of Social Workers, or the NASW, has a particular council focused on rehabilitation and inclusion in our profession, really recognizing the ways in which legal histories can sometimes be a barrier for students and or post MSW or post BSW professionals. So they actually have a very timely workshop. They do try to time it around this time, thinking about students who are poised to graduate and perhaps get into the workforce or apply for licensure, as well as those of you who are looking at practicum or internship processes. So Saturday, April 29th, I know it's a Saturday, but it's a really great workshop. These are folks who are very helpful, offer very tangible details and information. It's offered via Zoom. And we'll put the link to it also in the PDF of the slides. But please click to access and register in advance. When you click the link, it basically signs you up for the Zoom and registers you at the same time. So if you have legal histories, even if you think they may have been expunged or they're no longer showing on your record, we have found sometimes that things may show up again. We can talk a little bit about that if you have concerns. This can be a helpful space, and we'll share some other resources as well. So I want to talk a little bit about finances and internships. Less than half of our agencies offer, and I'll talk about that little asterisk in a moment, they offer stipends to students at the time the internship match is confirmed, okay? And so what I mean by that is this: we ask agencies every time we ask them if they're open to receiving a student, agencies that have already been approved by us, if they're open to receiving a foundation student. So we're not sending you places that aren't taking students, right? We also ask, if they offer a stipend, and sometimes they say yes, and then it changes. Sometimes they say no, and it changes. That's usually more the welcome surprise. And, part of that ambiguity, and again, sometimes they say we're not sure. And part of that uncertainty is a large part about kind of the timeline of the agency budget process might not align with when you're out. If you're talking with an agency about an internship, that might not fully align with their budget year. They may not know yet. They may have applied for a grant for funding for interns, really wanting to provide that, but they haven't received the money yet. So sometimes you'll see that question mark. And, some of our current students have said to us, hey, like, it's really important that you all are transparent with students about stipends. And so we endeavor to be really clear. So we let students know if we're making a referral to a match that has a stipend. We'll let you know what we know about any stipends that may be available. But again, that information could change. And so we do also encourage students to verify that upon contact with the agency. There's also a really wide range in amounts of a stipend. Some are like $500 per semester, or maybe just for the year. Some are more like $2,500. Some get even more into like $5,000 or even $18,000. I do want to say that those higher level, and I really need you to hear me, because sometimes students just see that $18,000 and focus there. So please hear me, that a lot of times those higher level, higher amount stipends are really reserved more for second year students. For whatever sets of reasons, part of it is, again, that second year students are at the agency for, another day a week, are able to offer higher stipends because students are there longer. And just in general, we've seen more of a development in this area for second year students. Now, that said, we continuously encourage agencies, and we'll talk a little bit about this in a moment. But this leads me to the right side of the slide, where I really want to again, encourage you to ask if you make contact with an agency. It's important to know, and we do want to right size your expectations, that, in the current landscape at this time in April of 2023 in the San Francisco Bay Area, it is not something that students should expect will always happen. It is definitely, as I said, it's less than half tend to offer stipends. But more and more agencies are really looking towards this. There's a lot of push for it across multiple levels and systems, which I'll talk a little bit more about. So please inquire. And again, we'll do our best to share what we know. Agencies don't always update us. So if that funding comes through, they don't necessarily remember to pick up the phone and call Berkeley Social Welfare, send us an email, right, to tell us that. But please do ask. They also may have some internships offer organizational fellowships for interns once they're already in the program. They may also offer things like reimbursement for mileage, things like this. So when we have information about this kind of thing from agencies, we'll share it with you, but it's great for you to reinforce and ask. Another really important resource for all of you who are coming into UC Berkeley is to talk with the Social Welfare Graduate Student Advising Officer, the GSAO, to talk with them about any questions about funding your degree. That is really a first place to go. I don't want to set an expectation that internships would be a primary source of any type of finances. I'm really trying to make sure it's clear that at present it is, it is not everywhere, right? And it is not a uniform amount at this time. So please talk with the graduate student advisor. You can also talk about things like financial aid. Work study can also apply in the internship area. We've been working more with our work study office and agency partners to try to make sure that agencies who are able and who can qualify for work study, working with our university, are able to do that. Sometimes that's a way forward, and there may be fellowships to which you're entitled. So please do ask those questions of your MSW advisor. So as mentioned, you may have heard a national movement called P4P, or Payment for Placement, and really bringing up this question of payment and internship. And one of the things, that I want to say about this is that it is a very, it's a very widespread question that happens as we think about the challenges, right, that contribute to, students really, asking for paid internships across the country. We look at this at a societal level, and we think about, the great increases in higher education costs, right, which between like 1980 and 2020 went up almost 169%, right? And that's a huge increase at the societal level. And that increases, student debt, right? And we think about, the ways in which that can disproportionately impact students of color, first generation students. So there's a lot for us to really consider there in terms of, financial hardship, at the campus level, following COVID and for other reasons, campuses, you may have heard this across the country, some colleges, smaller colleges, and others are closing, or others are, facing their own financial challenges and difficulties. We think about the internship level, and these are just some examples. We have a longer, piece if you'd like to read more about it. That's embedded in your internship application. But to really think about at the internship level, a lot of our placement sites have their own financial challenges. They are, chronically under-resourced and under-supported just at a societal level, and that plays out at the individual site level. They may have certain limitations. Some places are unionized, and because, unions, really are concerned about paying people who who might be viewed as doing similar work to their paid employees, and not all unionized places see it that way. And this isn't so much about the union as just I'm trying to acknowledge, the ways in which this can become a complex question in terms of where would the money come from. I think that there are some agencies who have been really trying to find workarounds for that. Some of them have been really looking at they've faced some challenges in terms of their paid staff feeling like, hey, we're not even making enough of a salary. Can you raise our salaries before you talk about interns? Right. So there's a lot of different challenges there. And then, of course, at the student level, right, we're seeing the ways in which housing and food insecurity disproportionately, impact students in higher education. We certainly see that on the UC Berkeley campus. We see that in the Cal State system as well. Really high, almost 17% of students in a survey in 2020 really talked about housing insecurity, and also high levels of students also endorsing food insecurity as well. And some of the resources at the end of this presentation talk about like the Basic Needs Center and other spaces where students can get resources and support. But those are just, again, some of the things that and there's plenty more, right, that really look at, the ways in which, finances can be challenging. And then we also think about, as social workers, what are the things that are happening? And as social workers, we often think about things in a multi-level practice, and you'll hear us talk about that a lot in our program. So just like the challenges are happening on multiple levels, also actions and opportunities for change are happening on multiple levels. So we think about at the societal level, debt and loan forgiveness, repayments that are possible for public loan forgiveness for folks who go into, social work type professions. There's some opportunities there. When we think about, steps at the campus or school level, definitely looking at things like where can our school, when we're able to and have the funds to provide coverage for students who may have fees associated with internships for medical clearances. Sometimes we're able to pay for those. We also, continue to look at, ways that we can support student cost savings. We regularly work with our agency partners, as I said, to really, express to them, the financial challenges that our students face, as well as, really sharing resources between agencies and encouraging agencies to reach out to one another about what they've learned about being able to provide those who've been able to provide stipends, what's helped them to be successful, and really recognizing that depending on the agency sector, they may have unique challenges as well as, strategies that can be helpful. So we do that and really kind of think about, as I mentioned before, supporting agencies to better understand the work study process and understand that as an agency site, that's an option. I'll also briefly get into employment-based internships, which can be an option for students under certain conditions that we'll talk about. So those are just some of the things that we think about at the internship level. And then at the student level, right? Students raising questions, raising awareness, engaging in advocacy and really thinking about, how can you let our campus know, or your faculty know, talking with agencies about things that might be a challenge financially as you think about internships. I definitely don't promise quick fixes here. I definitely, we continue to be in dialogue with students, with agencies, and, with our colleagues, my colleagues on the leadership team in Berkeley Social Welfare, actively involved in all of these conversations. We are applying for grant funding that includes, money for student stipends, so there's a lot of things that we are doing and trying to think about, but we don't, pretend to have all the answers. And I think our agency partners feel very much the same way. I think the good news is we have really good lines of communication open about these points, and that we continue to engage and to try to do our best around it. So I invite, if you have questions about this, please feel free to bring them, as we, engage in our work together. Just wanted to share some of that for now. So as I just mentioned, employment-based internships can be an option for students that are in, this would be for folks who are in social work type settings as a job currently, and it does require an additional application. So that is something that I need to review as the Executive Director of Academic Programs. And basically, there are more steps than what's here, but this is a brief summary. And then there's more that's involved for you that you can take a look at embedded in that application I've referred to a few times in this video, that you will receive together with it. But part of the employment-based internship considerations are, really making sure that students have substantial learning opportunities that are specifically related to our competencies, which we've discussed, that are separate from your employment duties. Okay, so the internship can be at the same place, but it can't be the same as your job. And it also needs to include a qualified field instructor or practicum instructor who serves as the supervisor. And that person needs to be separate than the employment supervision, right? So students who may have an internship at the place where they work can have work duties and a work supervisor, and can have intern duties and an intern supervisor. And part of this application that we ask students to fill out addresses how, tell us more about what you would learn there, and also doing some troubleshooting about, What are some potential challenges that can come up with employment-based internships? Some of those things include, how do you kind of protect your time so that you get to be a learner? Because sometimes agencies are like, oh, they're just down the hall. Can you just run over and pick up a client real quick? I know you're your internship, So it's like, how do we try to really proactively work with students and agencies to understand those boundaries and to think those through in advance? And also to talk about things like what happens if a student were to lose their job, if that also could mean they lose their internship, then that can not only interrupt potentially some financial issues, employment wise, but also can interrupt or kind of could contribute to a delay toward graduation if it also interrupts your internship. So these are just the things that we like to think ahead of time, not to hope anything bad happens, but just to kind of think it through in advance, so that students are really well informed and that agencies are too about what it requires. So this again is just a very brief summary, but we do like to signal to you that more is required here and that it is not an automatic. Please understand that even if, oh, I already know where I work is an approved agency for interns, that is not an automatic. It's both kind of where it is, the student, and all of the kind of individual factors. I also want to acknowledge that some of you watching this video are dual degree students. You may be MSW PhD students, you may be MSW MPP, Public Policy, or MSW MPH in Public Health. So again, you're all very welcome. And I know that, sometimes dual degree students have particular questions and areas of, that you're trying to maybe consider how internships you may have in those other programs or demands in those other programs, may impact your trajectory and your timeline. Please let us know. Again, in the questionnaire, we'll ask you about, or the application rather, we'll ask you some questions about that. So please make sure that you signal to us clearly, if you have specific things that you need to keep in mind, please let us know that. So I do just want to be really clear that students may not arrange for their own internship. Okay. So even if you've got a place that you're like, I know exactly where I'm going to go, please understand that as a part of our program at Berkeley Social Welfare, the way that we engage our internship program with students is we work with students based upon their application that they share with our office. Again, with your resume and your interests and all of the different things that, a lot of the areas I've already started to talk about, we'll ask you questions about those things. And that helps us to take the next steps I'm going to talk about. Okay, so please understand it's not personal or anything like that, but we do not allow students to arrange for their own internship. As I mentioned just now, even if you're hoping for an employment-based internship and you have it all worked out, we still have to approve that part. Okay, but otherwise, we're really looking at agencies that are already approved in our school. So I want to talk a little bit about this application that I keep referring to that should be together with this video in the email that you received. We want to ask that you dedicate at least an hour to this, okay? And we're providing, it is long, so I want to signal that to you. It's because we, again, we are really trying to be mindful and thoughtful about each of you as individuals. And as I mentioned, the variance in your needs and expectations as a student, and also as we kind of weigh that together with what we know about agency needs and variations and expectations to do our best to facilitate a thoughtful match. So please do give it that time. As I mentioned, it's long, so we also offer you a PDF version so you can kind of see where the questions are going before you get into the form. So we hope that's helpful to you as you think about what we're going to be asking. Just some broad strokes to kind of give you a sense. We're looking at, why do you want your MSW and why now? I don't mean that like you have to reapply to the program, but we're interested in, again, our students tend to have coming in the door a fair amount of experience already, right? And social work is one of those professions. I know for myself, I was out in the field for 9 or 10 years before I went back and got my MSW, right? And so there's a lot of roles that we might have where we don't necessarily need those letters after our name, for example, right? And so we're interested in, why are you doing this now? And what are you looking for from this degree? Because we want to think with you about what will help support you to kind of take where you already are and support you to go to the next level, if that makes sense. And those levels, as I mentioned, are not necessarily linear, like better or harder. Levels can also be about, exposure in different areas of practice. We're looking to support you to expand your exposure and your skill set, as I mentioned, right? When you have those letters after your name, there's that signals certain things about, what one might expect that you've had exposure to as a foundation, and then later as an advanced, and then later, once you have that MSW, what that means, right? So we want to think about that with you in mind, meaning not you as a monolith of students, but you as an individual student. We want to think about that. We also, invite you to share, if you would like, things about your personal contacts that would be helpful for us to know. We do ask a couple questions related to COVID, being mindful of, the kind of emergent level from pandemic to endemic, and thinking about any challenges that would be helpful for us to understand, or things that you need to keep in mind related to caregiving, timing, finances, etc. If you have special skills, if you have the ability to speak, write, or read in more than one language, we also ask you certain professional liability disclosure questions. This kind of comes back to something I was talking about earlier about students who may have legal histories. We ask you to be honest in answering these questions. And any next steps that come from that, in part because we provide professional liability insurance to all of our students, and our agencies expect that. And if there's anything that might preclude you from being covered, it's important that we understand that for us, and also that we can support you in forecasting some important next steps that you might take, to redress any of those concerns. So we just try to be transparent. Those can be sometimes hard things to talk about, and we just want to let you know that these are things that we have seen and dealt with before, and we're here to figure things out to the best of our ability. And having a legal history in itself does not preclude students from engaging in internships or field education or getting their MSW degree. Okay, it's just about helping us know so that we can do our best to make thoughtful matches, referrals, etc. Okay. Also, we ask about your access to having a California driver's license, valid insurance, and/or access to a car. Some of those things, sometimes all of them, some grouping of them can be required by agencies. And that is part of why we ask those questions. Sometimes as interns, we're transporting clients. As a student, you are not allowed to ever transport clients in your own vehicle, but you can transport clients in agency vehicles. And then sometimes they require that you have your own car so that you're able to, navigate community-based work, for example, home visits or other things like that. And then, of course, update that resume. I know I mentioned that earlier. So just want to make sure we credit all the great experience you've gotten since you submitted those applications to us too. So I want to talk a little bit about our first year placement steps. So please, again, spend at least an hour, and not that that's a magic amount of time, but what we mean by this is please don't just click boxes and phone it in. Please give it some thought, because we are using this as a very important document for us to really think carefully about you as an individual. So please, do that for yourself, first and foremost, because this is your application, and it helps us to be thoughtful with you. So thank you for that in advance. That is due on April 23rd at 11:59 p.m. And then again, our faculty consider your learning needs and interests, and then we meet together and think about this as a team. And also, again, looking at available agencies. And then our office will send you a joint introductory email to between yourself and an agency. And it's going to be your responsibility to follow up and follow through. Okay, so the agency, may have particular steps for you to do, and that is going to be up to you as the student. Agencies, they may, if they most require an interview, and so those will typically happen sometime between May and July. And I know that can feel like a really wide range. I will say some places move very fast. For example, school districts will want to take care of this before everybody clocks off for summer break. So you might see those spaces move really fast. You might see other spaces move a little bit slower. And so again, it's, once we make that connection, it's going to be your responsibility, to follow up. Okay. So please do handle your business and make sure that you're looking at that email. Um, if you, for whatever reason, in making connection with that agency, if it doesn't result in a confirmed internship, while we do send you to a place, saying to both you and agencies that we think this is a good match, from what we understand, agencies may view that differently. And so if it didn't result in a confirmed match, we need you to reach back out to our office at swfield@berkeley.edu to let us know, so that we can look at what are some next steps, okay, to really refer you to another place if that's needed, if that first match was not confirmed by the agency. We will send confirmation emails in early July, just to hear back, like, this is our understanding, of what the match is. So again, those are kind of some general next steps. So kind of breaking down the summer, this starts now, and it will potentially require you to stay engaged through a couple of steps. Again, agencies sometimes have multiple steps they ask of you. Please, pay attention to those. Again, those are your responsibility to follow through upon. Or follow through on, excuse me. And then they also may have what we call pre-placement eligibility requirements. For example, they may require you to get fingerprinted. They may have specific paperwork. You may have to come to their office to fill that out. They may require a background check. If you experience costs associated with having to get medical clearances, or drug tests, sometimes agencies require that. Please reach out to our office, and that will be included in our materials that we send to you, so that you know. And then in August, September, again, if for whatever reason the student didn't, we didn't send them for a match by May because perhaps they were delayed for a variety of reasons, they typically will pick up that process again in mid-August, when we're, back in session formally. As I mentioned, the class in terms of classes, right, in August, when the academic year begins, through to just before September 20th, as I mentioned, we have some coursework that's for all foundation students to support you to have a strong and well-informed beginning to your internship. So those are some of the things that are ahead. So setting yourself up for success, again, please allow time. I know I keep saying it, so please know it's important to complete that pre-placement application for us. Use and closely monitor your berkeley.edu email address. That's primarily how we will be reaching out to you, how agencies will be reaching out to you. Please respond timely to us and to agencies. I need you to know that agencies, may receive interest and interns referred to them from multiple schools of social work in the area. And so they may not just be considering one. We definitely reach out to places that we know have a space. But again, they may find that other students are more responsive or respond more quickly. So please understand that part of it, just us sending you isn't the end of the story. There are going to be things that you may need to do. And it's important to kind of set yourself up for success by responding timely. If you are in California and you're interested in an employment-based internship, we can't do out-of-state kinds of things. But if you, are interested in an employment-based internship, please start having that conversation with your supervisor. As I mentioned, the pre-placement application will prompt you to fill out a secondary application for that purpose. And then just some other things in getting ready. You may want to start preparing your friends, your loved ones, your employer, and for others for you to be involved in this rigorous full-time graduate program that's coming. As I mentioned, it's that Monday through Friday. So, want to encourage you to let folks know what's coming. And to do what you can to familiarize yourself with local and campus resources, whether that's coming to campus or it's poking around online. We've shared some resources with you at the end of this video. And you have the wonderful support of our student services office and the graduate student advisor. So please make use of those resources and know that there's a lot of support here for you. um, and also get some rest and try to enjoy your time before classes and internships start. Just keep an eye on that email, but also get your rest. Okay. So, those are, I think, some really big points. I know I've made mention a few times of these resources. These underlines are hyperlinks that you can access our practicum portion of our School of Social Work website, where you can find our calendar, an online guide to practicum education, an overview of the program. Again, that awesome MSW advisor, you can reach out to them here. You may want to check out the UC Berkeley Basic Needs Center or the Student Parent Center, Disabled Students Program. These are all just some of the resources available on our campus. There's others that we talk about in the pre-placement application. And then there's also the East Bay Community Law Center. The Clean Slate program is one option for students who may have legal histories and want to go through Clean Slate. We've had a lot of our students access their services and found them helpful. There's also legal resources on campus once you're already a student and registered for classes, which will happen a little bit later. But in the meantime, if you're aware, you may want to go to that webinar that I mentioned that's hyperlinked here for students with legal histories. And also, you may want to get something started and reach out to the East Bay Community Law Center, to see if they are or ways that they can support you or offer other referrals, depending upon where those incidents may have taken place. And then just this is more of a national website, but on field placement anxiety, because I just want to normalize that a lot of students worry about field placements, have anxieties about how they'll do there, if they'll get one, if they, what will happen once they're there. And so a longtime social worker and field director in the East Coast put this together, and a lot of our students have found it helpful. So wanted to share it with you too, since you are now going to be one of our students too. So again, we are just really delighted to welcome you to Berkeley. We really look forward to working with you along your journey. It may feel like it's starting a little earlier than you expected as we think about the internship process. But getting these steps taken care of now will really help us support you to have an on-time start and really look at having an internship that hopefully really balances the needs of those three areas that I mentioned. So thank you for your kind attention. I know this was long, and I hope it provided you with some helpful information as you think about how you can get ready for the journey that awaits. So I wish you all the very best, and we look forward to working with and learning from you and together with you in our program. Take good care.